3 of Coffee and MTG. Here with me, Nikachu. We love the Coffee and MTG, and we love the discussion about Magic the Gathering. So gather around wherever you are in this world at whatever time of day, whether it's the morning, afternoon, or evening. You brew up your cup of magic, and let's have a fantastic discussion today. And the discussion is going to be this discussion is going to be fantastic because I have the most amazing special guest for the show today. In fact, this is a guest I was looking for in the past, couldn't find him. Now we have him available. The Death and Taxes Master. Not even just a Death and Taxes Master. I would love to know the origin of Eldrazi Taxes. You know, the famed Eldrazi Taxes deck with Wasteland Strangler. It's basically like a 3-color deck because it plays black, it plays white, it plays the colorless. It's basically a 3-color Taxes deck. Piloted by this particular master, basically put to fame because of all his results. I would love to very much thank our special guest today, SpiderSpace. Welcome to the show, SpiderSpace.
Thanks for having me. You know, I got some beverage here as well. It's not quite coffee, it's chai. So
whatever floats your boat, you know. For me, it's coffee. For some people, it's going to be Slurpee.
It's Taxes to Merfolk. It's like same ballpark, but you know.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. So, it's very I'm glad that you're here, and it seems you're getting much more deeper into content creation. Because when I started this series, I had a lot of trouble looking for you. I couldn't find anything. So yeah, that's great, and you're now able to not only keep pushing Death and Taxes variants, but also now people can learn from you. So if there is somebody you want to learn about Death and Taxes who's been in the trenches for years and has innovated, because we'll go into it, you've now moved a little bit more into mono white taxes. A lot of people have been asking me, how do we play Death and Taxes in today's modern metagame? Well, I've got the person for you. It's SpiderSpace. He's doing it, going all mono white and making it work. So this should be a really good discussion today. So, and of course, if you love these interviews with the masters, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Oh, and before we go any further, I'd just love to thank my sponsors, themanabase.com, your home base for everything Magic the Gathering, and Mana Traders, the premier place to rent Magic cards online. You can support the channel by using my Mana Traders link in the description below, and you can get 20% off your first 3 months with my coupon code Nikachu. So we'll thank Mana Traders for being our sponsor. So SpiderSpace, for anyone who's meeting you for the first time, they don't know who you are, please let us know a little bit about yourself and what your accomplishments are with Death and Taxes.
Sure, yeah. So I've been playing Taxes. Pretty much it was along with Affinity, which is now a dead deck. Those were my first 2 decks in Modern. And originally, you know, I was fairly casual at that time. I had we played very casually. There's some guy locally who played Legacy Death and Taxes. I was like, how do I put this into Modern, right? And of course, the sub for Caracas was the sick tech with Manamo. So you like activate Mangara, untap Mangara, activate Mangara again. And I mean, it ended up being awful, and Mangara is largely unplayable. But you got to start somewhere.
Right.
And you know, I've toyed around with a whole bunch of decks in Modern. Death and Taxes has always been my home, and I think largely because I like brewing, and so Death and Taxes just has so many different variants, so many different ways to build your deck, tweak the deck. And I would say my biggest accomplishments with it are with the I call it Thalia Stompy. You'll see a couple different names for it.
Yeah.
Some people refer to it as Beauty and the Beast. So this is a variant that's actually pretty different from most other shells of Taxes in that it doesn't run Aether Vial. It runs Simian Spirit Guide, you have Gemstone Caverns, and you do this to accelerate out. So essentially it's like cheating on mana almost more than any other deck in Modern, except I guess there's also Tron and Amulet, right? But in a kind of, again, mirroring like an Eldrazi Stompy deck from Legacy, right? You don't get Ancient Tomb, but you've got these accelerants. So I've played a number of GPs with that deck. I've gotten, I've cashed most of those GPs. I think the probably best result would have been in, I think that was GP Las Vegas, I want to say 2017, where I top 64. It was like a 2,000 or 3,000 person tournament.
I was there.
Yeah, so you
Ton of
know,
people.
actually, funnily enough, I had a draw against Merfolk that tournament. Uh, um, but that's as far as paper. I don't actually play that much. Most of my tournaments are online, so I've gotten top 8 of things like boxes. I've gotten I believe there was a weekend there where I had like, or maybe a month where it was like 3 back-to-back first place in challenges.
Hmm.
So
I mean,
you
we
know,
have like a slew of accomplishments here. You know, modern. You gain 10th place in the modern champs. You know, consistent 5-0s, deep finishes in the modern challenges, and you have pages of this
mhm.
going on. So I mean, you have definitely been in. Well, maybe not always with Death and Taxes decks, but a lot of Death and Taxes and their variants.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a little bit of other things sprinkled in there. Like I said, I love to brew, but taxes is always my my home plate.
Right, right. So, Juan, I want to talk a little bit before we get too deep into uh, all the variations. How did the Eldrazi Taxes deck come to be? Did you make that? Was that something? Was that a shell that you adopted from somewhere else? Because as far as I'm concerned, you put up the most results with Eldrazi Taxes. Like whenever I see Eldrazi Taxes, SpiderSpace, SpiderSpace, SpiderSpace. Who is this SpiderSpace who keeps on putting up with Eldrazi Taxes? Tell me a little bit about it.
Sure. So it's worth noting that the go-to Eldrazi and Taxes variant that people think of is actually Black-White. You mentioned Eldrazi
Right.
Strangler, and that's actually not my go-to build of it. So
Okay.
the Chalice version and the Aether Vial version are different. So the version the probably most known for Thalia Stompy is not on the Wasteland Stranglers, the Tide Hollow
Yes,
Scullers,
that's
that
very,
stuff.
very different.
So there was a guy, I believe his name is Stabilo. This is way back in the MTG Salvation days, who had this really rough outline for what ultimately became Thalia Stompy. So I would say he, along with myself, and there was one other guy involved way back in the day who I can't remember his name at the moment. And we were sort of like the 3 main people, working on this deck, fine tuning it. So I would say like the original like creation was his deal, and then I kind of stepped in as well and helped to tune it. And certainly I'm have the most finishes with the deck. I think as far as paper, Tom Medvec years later picked it up and did decently at some SCG tours. But if you
We're
think Thalia
talking.
Stompy, you
Yeah,
think
we're yeah.
Spider Space.
Okay, so am I mistaken that you never played Eldrazi Taxes ever?
The black white version?
Yeah, the black white
Oh
version.
no, I mean, if there's a Taxes variant, I've played it. But
I get it. So okay, so you're more famous, or sorry, I would say you're more famous for the Eldrazi Taxes. I
okay.
think because it's more flashy in people's minds. Like I
Mhm,
definitely am. I recognize the results of the Stompy version because I even
mhm.
remember another Death and Taxes master, Jason Samard, in like
Right.
Snap adopted this thing when it got popular. But like when I get questions about Death and Taxes, I always hear about what happened to Eldrazi and Taxes. What's wrong with Eldrazi and Taxes now? No one talks about Thalia Stompy. So I'm just curious, what happened to Eldrazi and Taxes for it to just completely fall off the map? It doesn't even exist anymore.
Well, it's funny that you say that because the last 3 leagues I played against Black White Eldrazi and Taxes 4 times.
Maybe it's coming back. Okay.
But there's a number of reasons for that. So there's a lot of power creep happening in Modern, as I'm sure you're well aware.
Oh yeah.
And I would say that deck, the black white variant, kind of got pushed out a little bit because the 2 biggest tools that we've gotten for Death and Taxes have been number 1, a Giver of Runes, and number 2, Stoneforge Mystic. And unfortunately, black white Eldrazi and Taxes has a hard time fitting both of those cards in there. There's just like less flex room. I think most of the variants now have tried to force Giver in there, but you just really can't fit SFM, and that's kind of the classic thing, right? Like there's the
Mm-hmm.
tax package, and then there's the beatdown package, and
Yes.
Stoneforge turns all of your tax pieces into beatdown packages, as opposed to like I have to rely on having Thought-Knot Seer. So you kind of trade, Stompy, like the Eldrazi cards for Stoneforge, and then also your mana base just gets way better. And with the prevalence of Blood Moon, you're essentially playing a 3-color deck versus a 1-color deck. So I think the deck, can still win. I think you could easily, pick it up and go and, win a challenge or something. But I don't think it's quite where you want to be. Like Thought-Knot Seer isn't what it was. It used to just be a slam dunk against any of the like burn prowess decks. But Soulscar Mage has kind of changed that landscape as well.
Shrink that Thought-Knot Seer.
Right. So it's no longer just take your card and sit behind this thing you're never beating. So it's just kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of been power creeped out a little bit since it can't really adopt those tools that I think are essential to success with Death and Taxes right now.
All right, fantastic explanation. So now let's get into the core of Death and Taxes. Sure. Why are we playing this deck? Why play Death and Taxes at all?
Okay, so that's a good question. People often meme about this, like I'm in a taxes Discord, and even the moderators are like, well, we are playing taxes, so it's kind of a meme, right? And I'm sure, you play Merfolk, I'm sure you get the same kind of comments.
Oh, yeah.
But I actually do think there's some very real power to the deck, having that kind of turn 1 into turn 2 combo. It's just so inherently powerful to go Aether Vial into like Thalia, or Giver of Runes into, it doesn't have to be Thalia, just whatever your relevant 2-drop is in the matchup. If you're playing a creature matchup, Giver into SFM often will just win the match right there. So there is, it might not look like it on paper. It seems like a bunch of like bad white cards, or I guess I can just say white cards given WotC's design with white now. But there is some kind of hidden power there. You get to combine your disruption with your creatures, but honestly, it gives you a great way to explore Modern with a deck that is, it's not that expensive, and it's got just a huge amount of lines. I would say this deck,
yes,
more than any other deck, has made me the Magic player I am today. There's so much that goes into it. You really don't get that many free wins. You occasionally get your opponent who accidentally like cracks a fetch into your Arbiter, or you get to Ghost Quarter them off something. But for the most part,
I have my own Leonin Arbiter here,
ready to block all those fetches.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's just so much to the deck, and it makes you also learn your opponent's deck, right?
Yes.
So like that's the beauty of it, is if I play taxes, if I'm really struggling in a matchup, you know what I do? I actually go and I play my opponent's deck, and then I understand better how it works, and then I come back to taxes. I'm like, all right, now I know how to take that linchpin out and just, watch everything.
You're actually more vulnerable on mana than I thought.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So that's very interesting. So in between, let's just say good morning, Dexter Johnson. Good morning to everybody. Good morning. Hey, Grim Ducky. Although we're going to have some taxes people here today, probably. Good morning, Fish Fam. So remember to keep because we have our special guest SpiderSpace here today, make sure all your questions, remember you can add Nikachu MTG, or you leave 3 question marks before the question, 3 question marks afterwards. We'll definitely have some Q&A. And then when we do deck list review, hopefully everyone brings a Death and Taxes deck to get reviewed, because we have a Death and Taxes master here to give the feedback, to give the master level feedback on those types of decks. So we're going to still ask the standard questions that we do with our guests on this channel, but make sure all your questions are Death and Taxes related. All right. So what are the key interactions do you think that people need to know when piloting this deck?
Well, there's kind of a lot. I would say the biggest thing that you need to know with this deck is it's a very synergy based deck. So individually, your card's power level are not typically that high in comparison to other decks in Modern. You don't have any there's no Uro in your deck. There's nothing of that just sheer power level by itself, but you kind of string together these dinky creatures to get your wins. So obviously there's Leonin Arbiter, which combos with Path to Exile and Ghost Quarter to turn them into respectively the best removal spell in Modern and the best land destruction card in Modern, right? If you have Arbiter and they can't pay, Path to Exile is just 1, instant exile a creature. Ghost Quarter is just blow up any land. So obviously that's powerful. Of course, Thalia combines with Arbiter to tax their mana further. So this is kind of how you're slowing your opponent down while you hit them with these 2/1s and 2/2s. But Aether Vial kind of makes it all possible. You get to vial these things in. You can vial in that Arbiter in response to their fetch land. So those are all.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cheeky. So like basically against a Death and Taxes deck, you should be fetching before the Aether Vial gets to 2.
Yeah, so this deck has a lot of sequencing that goes into it, but it actually also makes your opponent sequence well too. So if your opponents don't realize, oh, I need to fetch first, you're not going to be able to play your cards because you're going to be sitting on a bunch of fetch lands, and maybe you need to play a 3-mana Teferi, but I have Thalia and you've got a fetch land, and all of a sudden it's like you can't do anything. Now, there is a little bit of a non-bow in the current builds with Stoneforge Mystic and Arbiter, but like I said, sequencing is a huge part of it. So this card gets whatever equipment you need for the moment. That might be Batterskull, that might be Sword of Fire and Ice, that might be Sword of Light and Shadow. It really just depends on the moment and the matchup. And then, of course, there is an abundance of tricks with the card Flicker Wisp.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't have, I think it's one word, no space there. Now, I don't have all of the ridiculous things you can do with this card in my deck. You mentioned Black White ENT. The probably best synergy that deck has is you get to Flicker Wisp any permanent, and then you play Wasteland Strangler and hopefully kill their creature, and then also you take out the permanent that's been exiled with Flicker Wisp to get a just ridiculous 2-for-1. Or 2-for-0.
Yeah, 2-for-0. It's very backbreaking.
Yeah. There's also.
I do not care about any card in Death and Taxes except this card. This card is the bane of my existence, especially since you can and if Aether Vial is on 3, I am at full alert, or I'm under a lot of stress. At any moment you could just Flicker Wisp and then blink the land I put Spreading Seas on, and then I'm doomed.
Right, exactly. So you can take the target even so they don't draw a card. I've done this with Field of Ruin, where my opponent goes to Field of Ruin me, and I flicker the land so they don't get a land.
Right.
The most common line with this card is using it at end step, either with Aether Vial or by Flicker Wisping another Flicker Wisp, or like Restoration Angel, the Flicker Wisp, so that you have that effect on the end step, and it actually takes out a card for their whole turn. If you want to really get into the ridiculous galaxy brain plays with this card, let's say you're trying to play around a cryptic tap from your opponent, right? You have Flicker, it's your main phase, you're going to try to get around it for this next turn. You can go Flicker Wisp, your Flicker Wisp, and then do it again at the end step, so it comes back to your turn and you take out their land so that they can no longer cryptic you. So it gets really convoluted with this card. Take out Tron, abuse that.
This whole return the card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step.
Yeah. So this card, people often say, oh, you don't have any flicker targets. How are you? You don't have Blade Splay, so you don't have Thraben Inspector. It's like, well, often this card is going to do a lot, even by itself. Even, you're going to main phase it. You can flicker your opponent's land with a Utopia Sprawl on it. You can kill a token with it.
You can target your opponent's Aether Vial. That's taking up to 2, and then reset it to nothing. They thought they were going to get to their top end. No, it's not going to happen.
Exactly. So this card really just does everything. So if you do play Death and Taxes, I encourage you to learn your Flicker Wisp interactions, because there's a plethora of them. And
it's a 3/1 flyer.
It beats face. It also holds swords pretty dang well.
Yes. So how big of a improvement was it to the archetype that Stoneforge Mystic got printed?
Oh, enormous.
Because a lot of decks trying to splash white for Stoneforge Mystic really didn't actually come to be, but the Death and Taxes variants did get to use it, and I can see some reasons why you do have evasion with Flicker Wisp. Giver of Runes can sometimes give evasion. Maybe tell us all the advantages Stoneforge Mystic has given to this deck now.
Sure. So the biggest problem Death and Taxes has as a deck is you just have zero card selection. Mm-hmm. You don't draw cards. There's no ponder. There's no, back in the day people would play Thraben Inspector, but that's really pretty small card advantage. We've tried fixing this by playing cards like Smuggler's Copter. Like you name it, somebody's tried it, and probably me if it's Death and Taxes. But Stoneforge Mystic kind of gives you some of that, right? So you get to select the best piece against your opponent with this card. And more than that, a lot of your creatures are very small, right? So, your opponent pays 2 mana and plays a Tarmogoyf, which is, probably like a 4/5. You play 2 mana and you get a 2/1 or a 2/2, or in this case, a Squire, right? So your creatures are often small in comparison. This card turns those dinky creatures, that 2/1, into all of a sudden probably maybe an unblockable threat that when it connects does more things depending on the sword. It gives you some meat in the card Batterskull. Maybe your opponent kills the germ and then all of a sudden you get to just flicker the Batterskull and you have a germ again. You don't even have to bounce the thing. So this card just turns all of your creatures that are disrupting your opponent into actual threats.
Right. So then any other key interactions we should be thinking about when piloting?
Yeah, there is one new thing to think about, and that is Lurrus. I actually have really taken to this card in Death and Taxes. And the reason being is you get to vial this card in and then instantly play whatever it is that's in your graveyard. You don't need Mishra's Bauble to make this thing worthwhile. So in my last mono white finish, I was running the card Selfless Savior, which you get to loop with this. So you just have indestructible on anything every turn. If they've killed your Thalia or your Arbiter, any of those key pieces. And of course, also Giver of Runes combos fantastically with Lurrus, where, let's say that you need to kill my Thalia. Now you have to kill Giver of Runes and then kill Lurrus and then kill Thalia to get her off the battlefield, which is just insane. Like, that's so many hoops to jump through, and I've probably just killed you by the time you've gotten through all of them.
Interesting stuff. Beautiful. All right, so what would you say are the deck's strengths, and therefore what do you think are the good matchups for Death and Taxes?
So I mentioned this earlier. Death and Taxes is not a deck that really gets a lot of free wins. You get those occasional, Ghost Quarter, ridiculous hands.
Those are the only ones that stick in people's minds. Right.
But for the most part, your matchups aren't going to be free. So that's kind of a minus in a lot of people's minds. But it's kind of like, I have a lot of Death and Taxes friends who joke that we're mono white Jund. The reason being is you're going to grind out every game. You're going to look for those tiny percentage points. But the strength is kind of in that, right? You're going to have game against a lot of the meta. If your opponent plays something like Elves, maybe not. But
I feel the same pain.
Yeah. But even the creature-based matchups have gotten a lot better with Giver and Stoneforge, and even in the sideboard we get cards like Tocatli Honor Guard, so you leverage your ETB, you use your Stoneforge and then play Tocatli, and all of a sudden your human's opponent does nothing while you hit them with a sword. So those bad matchups have gotten better. So I would say, any of the blue-based control decks have traditionally been pretty good matchups. That may be changing with Uro. Those matchups have been very, very close lately, and I've been trying to find a best way to adjust to that. But I would say you're probably your worst, consistently found worst matchup, at least for me, is going to be a deck like Jund. And the reason being is they just pick your synergies apart, and then they get to rely on their cards just being of better value. It used to not
raw card power.
Right. It used to not be the case that they could just easily grind you out, but Renin 6 is just horrible for us. in any deck with Renin 6, like if they go turn 2 Renin 6, it's just kind of like, ugh. Uh,
Take that, Flicker Wisp.
I mean, right. Like you go to play your Thalia, like if you're on the draw and your opponent's gone turn 2 Renin 6, how are you going to deploy that Thalia to the board? So that card in particular is a beating. Liliana of the Veil also doesn't help.
So I guess this like more segues into what are the deck's weaknesses.
Yeah.
So you're just not good against any decks that just slowly pick apart your own deck.
Right. So things that pick apart your weaknesses like that. I will say the other probably main bad matchup in Modern at the moment that I just can't seem to figure out what happened here is Eldrazi Tron. So it's interesting because traditionally you'd think, oh, Death and Taxes must be great against any Tron variant, right?
Sure.
Like you disrupt their mana, you stop their searching. But Eldrazi Tron really doesn't rely on Tron as much as Green Tron does, so you can't just like knock out their mana and be done with the game. And the card Karn the Great Creator, I think in particular, has just completely changed the dynamic of the matchup. You used to just kind of grind with them and then slowly, beat them down with flyers while you try to deny they're getting to like Reality Smasher and friends. But now they play a Karn and then they go and get a Walking Ballista, or they go and get an Ensnaring Bridge, and they get their Ensnaring Bridge, and now you just have to wait for Flicker Wisp, and then all of a sudden they're just like, oh, Maze Mind Tomb, draw cards, and you're just
game life, draw more cards.
So the matchup used to be good, and then it was even, and then it was a little bit bad, and now I'm convinced it's just bad. So it's really interesting how that one in particular has changed a lot. But I think you can beat the prowess decks with a little bit of sideboarding. It's my experience that you're a little bit favored against green-red or the Panza variants. So, I think it's a fine deck in the meta.
Awesome. What do you think is the most common mistake people are making when piloting Death and Taxes?
Well, Death and Taxes is a very punishing archetype. So that means if you make a misstep, you can easily lose the match because of that misstep.
It's funny hearing you talk is like almost the exact same things I tell other people. We're working with like small advantages building on top of each other, and you like misstep once and that's it. The whole thing's over basically.
Exactly.
And we lose to the same decks, Eldrazi Tron and Elves.
For sure.
Walking Ballista and Snaring Bridge.
It's rough. Yep. The same stuff. Probably the biggest thing is sequencing, though. You get to your turn 2. People ask me this all the time of like, okay, I have Leonin Arbiter, Thalia, Stoneforge, all of your ideal 2-drops. I have them in my hand. What do I play on turn 2? And frankly, there's not a good answer. The answer is very much it depends. I can say in the blind, usually I go with Thalia. She's probably the one I play the most on turn 2. But if your opponent's playing a creature deck, that's not right. If your opponent has Renin 6 in play, that's not right.
Right.
So that bit of sequencing can be absolutely backbreaking. If you decide that, I need to play Arbiter first to turn off my opponent's mana, even though it means I can't search with Stoneforge Mystic, that might be the correct decision, or it might be the totally wrong decision. You're going to lose the match because of it. So that sequencing is just something you really have to think through.
Right. Okay. So that's going to come definitely in part to experience, but I think it also could, you can learn that experience by following someone like you that you can see the differences pending the matchup and the situation. So what do you think is the most misplayed card?
Ooh. Can I give you 2 answers for that?
Go for it. We get double the answers on this show, everyone.
I think it's actually often your land destruction lands like Ghost Quarter. I can't tell you the amount of times I see inexperienced players just, they have Ghost Quarter in play and it's an action that they can take, so they want to use it. Right. And sometimes there's even Leonin Arbiter involved, and you say, "Oh, I get to strip mine my opponent. It must be correct." And it's the truth is it's usually correct, but it's not always correct. There are also times where your opponent, let's say, again, you're playing against Jund. Most Jund lists run one mountain. You need to know your opponent's mana base, and if they have that mountain in play, or you already know what their color sources are, maybe you need to use that Ghost Quarter without an Arbiter so they can't Kolaghan's command you. So that card, I would say you just really need to know what's going on, the context of the game of like, okay, am I ahead? Do I have Leonin Arbiter and I'm ahead on board? Okay, yes, use it. If I'm behind, you probably don't want to use it.
Okay.
And then number 2, I would say, is Flicker Wisp, just because there's so many things you can do with that card, and they can be kind of marginal decisions of like, ooh, I could Flicker Stoneforge, or I could take out your land. And which one of those is right? It just, again, it depends.
Right. Then in your case, what is the most underrated card in the Death and Taxes deck? Like what card has like some secret power that no like people are leaving percentage points on the table because they're not valuing this card high enough?
You mean in terms of deck building, or like how they actually play the game?
We could say both. Say both.
Sure. I would actually say in deck building, it's got to be Luris.
Okay.
So that card has just been a huge asset to the deck, and people often think that it's not worth it because you don't have the Mishra's Bauble loops that a lot of decks have. And actually, there have been variants when we were in the companion meta where people actually tried to do that, and I just never was a fan because you have to pay for Bauble if you have Thalia, and it just becomes awkward.
Oh yeah, that is a non-bo.
So just waiting and knowing when to deploy this card. Also, like if you know your opponent's going to play a Verdict, you can just hold Aether Vial on 3. They Verdict, you Violin Luris, you go to your turn, you play a Thalia from the graveyard, deploy another threat from your hand. All of a sudden, that Verdict did absolutely nothing. So this card's really been fantastic for the deck.
So how about for cards that people already use? What is the most underrated of them all?
It's funny that you say this. I have a hard time answering that question because there are people who don't play the deck, look at the deck and like, oh, those cards are trash. Like all of those cards.
They're all bad.
But people who actually play the deck, I see a big debate about Stoneforge and Arbiter a lot of the time. People say that the non-bow isn't worth having. And I just don't think that you can really consistently find that much success with the deck without both of those right now.
Okay. So Leonin Arbiter and Stoneforge Mystic are core to Death and Taxes.
Yes.
Why don't people have enough love for Leonin Arbiter? So it's like this is a card that has been classically in the deck, so some people just think it's it's past its prime.
Yeah, so there's a lot of games where you play with this card where you don't actually see what it does to your opponent. So for instance, I play Arbiter and that, so you're going to fetch first. Whereas if I didn't play Leonin Arbiter, maybe you could get those Mystic Sanctuaries sooner, or like
right.
And with Stoneforge, obviously there's a non-bow there, right? Like if I have Leonin Arbiter and I go to cast Stoneforge and I can't pay, I don't get equipment. So it's kind of, it seems like that's not worthwhile, but you have Aether Vial, and I think Aether Vial plus Stoneforge makes this the deck best equipped to actually use Stoneforge, because you get to use your mana and you still, you vial it in. So it just, I think that's a huge strength to the card. So you just need to know how to sequence around that. Or, like you can even vial in Stoneforge and then pay for Arbiter because you vialed it in.
Oh yeah, of course. So you have the mana available. Exactly. I guess one thing that might have, in some people's minds, might have made this card weaker is that there's less fetch lands in the format than there were in the past, as they printed more fast lands and horizon lands. There's a lot of archetypes that are less dependent on fetch lands, but like as you also mentioned, Mystic Sanctuary decks are at an all-time high, so it's hard to recognize when they really needed to fetch to keep that Cryptic Command thing going. So yeah, Leonin Arbiter still good in 2020. Do not underestimate Leonin Arbiter. Don't forget about the Cat King. So Now, this is going to be a bit of a strange question because I just found out that you were playing the deck I'm about to compare to. Why do you play your deck, say, over humans? Because humans has a lot of parallels to Death and Taxes in that it has taxing effects between Thalia, prison elements like Meddling Mage, Kitesail Freebooter, but has a way faster clock. I mean, it's not even comparable. It's probably one of the most, aside from prowess, it's like one of the most like aggressive creature-based decks in the metagame. Why would someone want to play Death and Taxes over humans? Although I say this awkwardly because you started playing a little bit of humans, so maybe you could play both of them.
I just wanted to see how humans was in the meta, but I of course prefer Death and Taxes almost always. I think that it used to be a little bit different where humans, if you played against a creature matchup where Thalia didn't matter or Freebooter didn't matter, it kind of still was fine, right? Because you could just play Thalia's Lieutenant and you could play Mantis Rider and then you just ended the game. But I think Stoneforge has kind of changed the texture of those matchups where I actually think that over the course, like maybe not pre-board, I would say pre-board you're a little bit unfavored, but post-board, Death and Taxes actually is now favored against humans, which is just an insane statement. And it's just because of that, Giver, Stoneforge, and then you get to go to post-board and bring in those Tocatli Honor Guards. So I think, if you're playing a creature deck, Stoneforge is just such a powerful tool for you. That it just makes games unwinnable for people that you would otherwise have no business winning.
Gotcha. Lastly, what kind of person do you think this deck is for?
Sorry, I laugh because I know that you asked this question, and in the past, I'd never really thought about this. I always would get people telling me like, oh, you must be some kind of person to play this deck. Like, people really don't like playing against Death and Taxes, which boggles my mind because I actually think it makes for really interesting matches, almost regardless what you're playing against, which isn't always the case with a lot of decks in Modern. So I would say this deck is a great way to make you a better Magic player. It's a great way to really play a good creature-based deck in Modern that you can tune at a moment's notice. If you like to brew, if you like to take charge of your deck rather than just completely net deck something, this is a great place to start because you can maybe you start, maybe you take my last mono white finish and you say, hey, you know what? I really like red and I want to put Seal of Fire and Luris and Seasoned Pyromancer in my deck. Well, you can do that. Maybe you like blue and you want to Spell Queller and Meddling Mage people. You can do that. There's so many different variants of the deck, so it's just such a robust archetype, and it truly, I really think that this deck is what has made me the Magic player I am today.
Gotcha. Do you mind if we do a quick deck tech of when your latest finishes?
Sure.
What looks like mono white. I think it's white. It says white red. What's up with MTG Goldfish? They do the same thing with Merfolk as well. It's awful. All right. So maybe first, I think I hear a lot of people asking this question. What's the advantage to going mono white right now?
Okay. Yeah. So the biggest answer is the mana base. So Gruul is a extremely prevalent matchup in Modern, and I just, even like Thalia Stomp, you're playing that, you still have 5 planes and a waste. That's a lot of basics, and you still just get Blood Moon out of games. You're like playing a color and a half deck, and you're getting Blood Mooned out. So this really works around that very well. You're playing 10 basics. It makes it a lot harder for someone to Blood Moon you out of Magic, and I think that's one of the biggest allures of this version of Death and Taxes. You also just get 8 land destruction spells or lands.
4 Ghost Quarter, 4 Field of Ruin.
Right. So even without Leonin Arbiter, Field of Ruin can really mess up Mystic Sanctuary. Your opponent goes to fetch something, and you just, even if they can't, like, you don't have Arbiter, they still shuffle away that Cryptic command.
Right. Yeah.
And we've kind of been seeing a resurgence of Tron to kind of maybe fight that. This is also obviously good against that, having 8 land destruction lands in your deck. That's probably the biggest reason to be in mono white. It's also just consistent, right? You're never going to have a hand where it's like, oh, I have 2 Eldrazi temples, but I have a Tide Hollow Sculler in my hand. It's just not going to happen.
Very important for everyone to know that Field of Ruin forces your opponent to shuffle their library, or like forces to search their library, whether they want to choose a basic or not. So because with Ghost Court you have the option, I believe, you may search your library, whereas with Field of Ruin you have to.
I want to add just one little tidbit there. I'm really just harping on these Mystic Sanctuary decks today.
You need to in this meta. I mean, Uro is a big deal, and all the other Uro variants.
It's true. So if your opponent is, doesn't understand this, and some will, some won't, they want to go for their Mystic Sanctuary Cryptic Loop, so they go to tap your team and pick up Mystic Sanctuary. If you Ghost Quarter Mystic Sanctuary, they're done. That's it. Like, bye-bye Cryptic.
The Cryptic does not resolve because it has one target. The whole tap, Cryptic specifically says tap all creatures your opponents control, something to that effect. It doesn't target an opponent. So if a spell has one target and you counter it, and in this case, the Cryptic command was targeting a land and nothing else, because the land gets blown up, the whole spell fizzles. So it gets countered. The Cryptic command does not tap anything. I've had similar situations where the opponent tries to Cryptic tap team, but bounce my Mutavault, because the Mutavault was lethal itself, but then I like Tectonic Edge the Mutavault, and then or dismember the Mutavault, whatever. I got rid of my Mutavault, and we can get in with our team. So very, very, but you'll have this line like way more often to disrupt that Cryptic command. Oh yeah, very hard for them. How would you say what would you say the Uro matchup is like against all the Uro variants?
It's really interesting. I think it's very close. I think that, the only problem card out of the Uro decks is Uro. Like, everything else doesn't really matter. You
hear that, Uro decks? When that thing gets banned, you're in trouble against Death and Taxes.
Because there's a lot of games where, especially if you're on the play or you Violent Thalia, either of those things, they really just have a hard time functioning as a deck. Thalia gets underneath them. Their mana, got a lot worse with Astrolabe being gone. And then it just kind of becomes this, like, can I kill you before you Uro me? And if you can't, then you lose. And if you can, then you win. So.
Gotcha. All right. So let's go through the list. Giver of Runes. Is this, how good is this in the deck? Because obviously I see this all over the place now.
It is amazing. It is beyond good. It is. I think it's maybe even more important than Stoneforge Mystic in terms of new tools that we have gotten.
Oh, that's big.
So this deck used to be very clunky. You would have Aether Vial, and that was really your only good 1-drop. Path to Exile is a 1-drop, but it's not a proactive 1-drop. Thraben Inspector is a fine card, but it's just miles worse than this, and it gives you consistency, right? So now, like, the 1-2 punch of Aether Vial or Giver, or I've even also added the card right below that, Selfless Savior, to be a kind of worse Giver, just so I can have that consistent turn 1, turn 2 play, because so many decks just, I play a relevant 2-drop and it's protected. I just win the match or the game.
Right.
They also combine with each other to create a sort of soft lock against removal.
Yeah, it's frustrating to see Giver of Runes turn 1, because it's basically, well, okay, I dismember this thing or I dismember nothing.
Exactly.
You're going to protect anything for any turns afterwards.
Exactly.
So you hear that, Wizards of the Coast? Who would have thought printing a good 1-drop would help an archetype? The Merfolk community is starving for a good 1-drop. We still have nothing. They will not give it to us. So Giver of Runes. Just a quick question: was the Death and Taxes community like overwhelmingly happy when they saw this card spoiled? Like, was it an instant slam dunk include, or were people skeptical about it?
I would say it was a slam dunk include into everything except black white ENT.
Okay.
But there was a lot of, the instant thing was like, oh, well, it can't protect itself, so it's just terrible in comparison to other runes. But actually, that pro colorless clause and it being a 1/2
Yes.
are both huge things.
Especially in our metagame with Eldrazi.
Right, right. So, I mean, occasionally, it's not in this list, but I've occasionally also played Spellskite in conjunction with this card,
Mhm.
which is also very good. Your opponent goes to Bolt Giver runes, or let's say push. You get to go redirect push to Spellskite and then give Spellskite pro black. So it's that same kind of like pseudo lock.
Yeah. Gotcha. Leonin Arbor, of course, just a staple to this deck. We talked a little bit about it. Sarah Avenger, the return of Sarah Avenger. Let's hear about this.
Yeah, so this card, has been around a long time and really hasn't seen play in ages.
Yes.
And the reason that it's here is, number one, it's an evasive threat, and flying is very good right now.
Mhm.
It's also not something that your opponent can lava dart, which is a big deal. It holds swords. It probably holds swords better than almost anything else except for maybe Mirren Crusader. And it's also great with Lurrus, right? So this is my premier beater slot. You kill my beater, all of a sudden I play Lurrus, I get back the Sarah Avenger.
Interesting. All right, great. And Stoneforge Mystic, Snap 4 include. Maybe any words about the particular swords that you want to run?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the sword package that we get with Stoneforge Mystic.
So I think that sort of Fire and Ice and Batterskull are slam dunk includes in pretty much any Stoneforge deck. I think the Sword of Light and Shadow is kind of the flex sword, if you will.
Can you explain Sword of Fire and Ice? Why? Because I have not actually seen Sword of Fire and Ice in every single, I would say, really? Stoneforge Mystic deck. Like, I'm not talking specifically Death and Taxes, but
sure.
Sometimes I don't see it. So what is the... is this strictly for card advantage?
Like, I guess I should say if you're playing 3 equipment. Because some of the control variants will only play 2, and for those decks, their premier sword is sort of a Feast and Famine. That's a good point. If you're playing 3, then this is the next sword that they will play. The reason being is this card, it's almost a little bit actually reminiscent of what Uro does once it comes down. Because you draw a card every time you hit them, you also deal 2 damage, so maybe you kill their creatures or you just hit them. It ends the game very, very quickly while also putting you further and further ahead. Yep. So if I connect with this sword just once, I'm feeling fantastic. And each time it connects beyond that, it snowballs out of control. So even though the protection colors don't seem the most relevant in Modern, there's not that many blue creatures you're trying to get through. There are a decent number of red ones, with prowess being everywhere. But pro red with a sword isn't even that relevant a lot of the time, because it often puts your creature out of bolt range automatically. But just, I would say the effect on this sword is probably the most powerful, or at least in contention for the most powerful effect.
Gotcha. Okay, so how about Sword of Light and Shadow?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to this being the flex sword. You'll see people play Feast and Famine, even. I've seen them do it with Death and Taxes. And the reason that I prefer Light and Shadow, I think, the protection colors on this sword are extremely relevant. +2/+2, like I said, often means your dude can't be bolted. Pro white, pro black means pretty much this sword says pro removal, right?
yeah, exactly.
Which is obviously fantastic. And then the effect, it's kind of similar to Lurrus, and I actually have really liked the combination of having Lurrus and Sword of Light and Shadow, especially in these attrition-based matchups. So you'll have an opponent, like, let's say they Thoughtseize your Lurrus, and then you get to Sword of Light and Shadow connect, bring back Lurrus, play Lurrus, and all of a sudden they're kind of in this just extremely awkward position of, like, you're just gonna bring back anything I kill.
Okay, so that's has good synergy with the deck, bringing back all your creatures.
I mean, in any purely creature-based deck like this, I think that that's going to be the go-to thing. If you're playing control, obviously, you want to hold up Cryptic Command after connecting. It's a different story.
All right, 4 Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and you're like solid on 4.
Oh,
no, we're not going to 3. We're going for the full 4 on Thalia.
Well, so like I said, that turn 1 into turn 2 play being the best thing you can do, Thalia is one of the most important cards for that. So why would I want to reduce the consistency of having that powerhouse play? It's also worth noting, she is legendary, but she's also often a kill on sight card.
Yeah.
So if your opponent kills her and you have a backup, that's often good for you. If they're not killing her, then probably you're in a good position.
Gotcha. And do you think Thal is good against, like, what isn't she good against right now? She must be an absolute beating for the prowess decks.
They can lava dart her, but they have to do so, right? Like, again, kill on sight. The only deck that's really seeing play right now would be something like Goblins, where she's, obviously not going to do anything against.
Right. So we have Flicker Wisp and the 2 Luris. So so this is what you think is maybe missing from Death and Taxes decks right now. They should be including Luris into their archetypes.
I do think 2 is the right number, just because you sandbag this card a lot of the time. So you want to see the card, but seeing it in multiples really isn't going to do very much, because you're already your opponent's already used a lot of their removal or their sweepers, etc. And then you kind of are trying to aim to set up the Sport State of Luris Giver anyway. So I think 2 is the right number.
4 Path to Exile. We talked a little bit. So you have this, it's a free land to play. So legendary can help protect. I think it can help protect Luris and Thalia.
So
nothing else is legendary.
Just beating Bolt with Luris is nice.
Yeah.
I've also been able to protect Thalia versus Renin 6 with onboard tricks, which is always nice.
Right. Got to protect yourself from the board. Here's something interesting. 23 land. Why so important to have? Maybe this is not too many. Maybe this is the right number, but you're running quite a few. I wouldn't say maybe you aren't even running too many mana sources. You're running mana sources very similar to humans, because they have 19 lands, 4 Noble Hierarch, 4 Aether Vial. So why 23 lands? And is that the standard number that Taxes usually has? Because you have, like, overall, it's a pretty low curve in the grand scheme of things. It's like Luris and Flicker Wisp are the most expensive things in your deck.
Yeah, so the deck typically runs either 22 or 23 lands. And I actually started on 22 with the Stoneforge builds. But I found that, number one, being able to Stoneforge, activate, and equip a sword was absolutely paramount. I would have so many games where it's like, if I rip land number 4, I will win. And if I don't, I will lose. So just having that extra land is obviously helpful there. It's similar with Luris. If you cast Luris and then you can have that 4th land to instantly get value, that's a big deal. But also it's a huge point with Death and Taxes that you actually use your lands as spells, right? So, a Ganjo Castle, kind of, and obviously Plains just cast your things, but we have 4 Canopy lands and 8 land destruction cards, right? So that means that those are actually things you're often proactively doing. So if I'm constantly using my lands as a resource, I actually do want them. And then it's not a problem if I draw, I'm playing against Tron. Oh no, I drew my 3rd Ghost Quarter, or whatever will I do, right? Like that's a good thing. There is some actual consideration. I've really thought about running a 5th Canopy land with those cards coming out. Just so you can help to mitigate that flood. But I think that the damage ends up being a little bit too much for this deck if you start going beyond that 4th one.
Right. This deck doesn't really kill by turn 4. I find when I play a much more aggressive version of Merfolk, I can take on more Horizon lands because I'm trying to win the game in a short period of time. But if in versions that are trying to win by turn 8, turn 9, turn 10, all that damage adds up.
Exactly.
do you have anything to say notably about the sideboard? I mean, we have some, Rest in Peace is an obvious one.
Yeah,
Uh, any
there's a
interesting
couple
tech in
things.
here?
Brent and Forge Tender. People always ask me if they should be playing Core Firewalker, and I very firmly stand on no.
Okay.
And the reason is this card is fantastic against prowess, right? So turn one, let's say if you're on the play or the draw, depending on what they're doing, it just instantly stonewalls their dude. So it's a pseudo removal spell that then you
Boom.
get to use late game to then start countering burn spells, right? Like if I have Luris and Brenton, how are you ever killing me with a burn deck? It's like prevent your burn spell,
Right. Yeah.
lifelink, bring back the thing that's preventing your burn spell and stopping combat. This
I
card
guess
is
the key is they need to run Luris to get fulfill the full strategy, fulfill the full synergy with this card.
Yeah, I mean, Luris just makes this even better. But also this card is good against anger. Your opponent plays Anger of the Gods, and you just 1 mana to say no, you don't, or even
Right. Yeah. Okay.
this also kind of becomes like a similar to Selfless Savior against red decks also. So this card just does everything. I would not leave home without at least 3, and if there's a lot of red, I would even play the 4th in the board.
Mm-hmm. All right. Cool. All right. So let's answer some questions if we've got any here, and I'm sure we do. All right. So let's see what people have been asking. We can't get to everybody. We'll try. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one, but Satamane asks, what does SpiderSpace think about Simeon's Spirit Guide to turbo out taxers?
Well, I mean, I love Thalia Stompy, and I actually, I just tried it again last night. I hadn't played the deck in so long. I thought it was just going to be bad in the meta, and I actually got a pretty nice 4-1 with it.
Ramping out like Chalice on game one is like fantastic right now. They're not prepared for that at all.
Oh, for sure. It just dumpsters all of those prowess decks. Mm-hmm. So I actually do like it, but I think that it has to be the right shell. So I would not be running Simeon and Aether Vial. I do not think that is at all worth your time, because you're playing, at that point, 8 cards that are essentially just mana cards. Mm-hmm. So you're going to end up with a lot of games where you're like, if you have Aether Vial and Simeon in your opener as well as land Thalia, what do you do there? Are you need to play Aether Vial, but you also are like, hey, I could power out Thalia, but if I do this, then when am I playing Aether Vial? So it just,
yeah, exactly.
I would say it's great in specifically the Stompy shell. I wouldn't run it otherwise.
Just thanks to Lonely Isotope for the 2-month subscription. Thank you very much, Lonely Isotope. I don't know how much Historic you play, but what does Taxes need to have a Historic version of the deck viable?
I don't play Historic, so I'm kind of grasping at straws here, but I don't know that it really would be. The number one reason being that I don't think Thalia is particularly relevant in the format. Mm-hmm. And if she's just not going to be good in the format, what disruptive creatures are you playing that really gets you there? I would guess that a deck like Spirits would have a easier time being a relevant deck in that kind of archetype or that mm-hmm. kind of format rather than Taxes, because I can't imagine Leonin Arbiter doing that much. I guess Containment Priest stops your Muxus opponents.
Yes.
So maybe that is something.
That's a brutal archetype to play against.
Yeah.
All right. Just quickly, Okio. Yes, the interview will be available at Nikachu MTG streams, but not any other podcast format, because we're not a podcast. We're the most popular podcast that is not actually a podcast. This is a stream. People are calling me a streamer when I was just a YouTuber, and now people call me a podcaster when I'm a streamer. Should we, as Merfolk players, be looking to disrupt Death and Taxes post board, or just look to protect our game plan instead? What would you say?
I would say neither. I would say you need to kill me as fast as you can, because Death and Taxes is going to be favored as the game goes on. You really don't have any threat that I can't answer. Like Path to Exile kills any and every one of your creatures.
All of them.
Flicker Wisp stops you from having unblockable things, and Stoneforge Mystic means that I just definitely go over the top. Like that pro blue on Sword of Fire and Ice plus kill one of your things is ridiculous. So you need to get underneath me as a Death and Taxes player. So you're looking to come out the gates early.
We got to swing. Got to swing, people. Swing the fists. Which sword protections are most relevant to Death and Taxes matchups? Is there room to branch out from the obvious Fire and Ice and Feast and Famine?
Yeah, so Feast and Famine's protection is actually pretty relevant. Unfortunately, the most relevant matchup for it is Jund, where swords are going to be very hard to actually get to use. It's also worth noting that we have absolutely 0 hand disruption in this build. So Feast and Famine is not going to be doing as much. I think if you're going to play that card, I would play it in like a Displacer build or a blue-white build where you get to then hold up Spell Queller or like a Displacer activation.
How is Prowess and Burn with a lot of spot removal? So I'm guessing, like, what's the matchup like against those fast red decks with tons of removal?
I think it's close game one. It's going to depend a lot on what their start looks like. If they have a ton of threats, it's probably going to be very difficult. But conversely, if they don't remove our essential threats, they're going to have a very hard time, right? If they don't kill my Stoneforge Mystic and I get Batterskull, they're probably not winning that game. But post board, I think we get a lot better just because of, you need to dedicate those slots to Brent and Forge Tender and to your extra removal like Winds of Abandon, because our white-based removal doesn't care that Stormwing Entity gets out of bolt range or push range.
Mm-hmm. How problematic are Wraths when you play Death and Taxes?
I mean, we're a creature-based strategy. You can almost certainly lose to a Wrath. But I think that there's a definite way where you can play around a Wrath, and you have to decide at what point you're just going to say, hey, I'm going to kill you next turn if I deploy this threat, so I just have to hope you don't have the Wrath. I think that's something that comes with time as you get more experience with the archetype. Like, okay, I'm going to hold this, like I mentioned earlier, Luris with my Aether Vial, so that you Wrath, and all of a sudden I just have a full board again.
Right.
I mean, it's actually very funny. Control players always tell me, "Oh, Death and Taxes easy matchup," and I'm like, "Control easy matchup," and it ends up being a very skill intensive kind of matchup.
And I mean, there are tools that you have to mitigate the Wrath, like Aether Vial, for example. So I mean, they Wrath. The board can be rebuilt.
Yeah.
The board can
Also,
be rebuilt.
Selfless Savior gives something indestructible.
True. And this is most certainly has been answered, but is Stoneforge Mystic and Arbiter too much of a non-bow to play together? Are there better options?
No.
We just had a masterclass to say that these are the things you need to be playing in today's metagame.
I just can't envision a world where you don't want both of these things. And your alternatives to like not playing Arbiter or Revoker, which is not good enough in the meta, your alternatives to Stoneforge Mystic are things like Blade Splicer, which I'm just not going to play that card like probably ever again. There's a small chance if I just have to play against Endless Liliana of the Veils, but I would say overall it's just absolutely necessary to play both of them, and sequencing means the non-bow is really not going to be an issue most games.
Mm-hmm. What are the advantages of splashing, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of each splash?
That's a long question. I'm not going to break down every single color variant. I'll do a minor footnote here for blue being not... I don't want to be in blue because there's no blue horizon land, and I think that that's pretty essential.
One day there will be. I'm waiting. Very patient.
Me too. But the red slash is actually pretty good. I like Seal of Fire, Luris, and Seasoned Pyromancer a lot. So if you're playing against a lot of those, like, you want to kill those Arbor Elves, jam those Seal of Fires. There's black-white, both Eldrazi Taxes and not Eldrazi Taxes. I would avoid a 3-color mana base in a Blood Moon meta. But Dark Confidant is good against everything except Prowess. So there is some kind of thought towards that. And then I don't like green particularly right now. I know that there was a green-white Eldrazi list that had some success, but I just can't bring myself to play Noble Hierarch in the Lava Dart meta.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I would say micro splashes are real things. Like I've toyed with just mono white splashing, like I just green for like sideboard Godug Teague or things like that. Unfortunately, the best green card that I would want is Scavenging Ooze, which can't really be micro splashed.
Yeah, I need a little bit more mana to actually get some use out of it.
Yeah.
Will you choose to put different swords in your deck according to the current meta, or are you usually using the same swords?
Usually it's the same swords. I think it has more to do with your deck construction rather than the meta. Of course, if the meta changes your deck construction, then all of a sudden, maybe that would be right. If I was playing a black-white list with like 4 Thought-Knots here, 4 Sculler, maybe even some Thought Seizes, Feast and Famine starts to look pretty good. But otherwise, I would stick with what I have.
Here's a pretty interesting question. Which matchups do you want to Tocatli Honor Guard for? Looks like another non-bow with Stoneforge Mystic. All these non-bows! That's why Stoneforge is so good. But also with Flicker Wisp. So which decks are so affected by this card that the non-bow becomes it's worth it?
Yeah. So I get this question a lot. I also want to answer, maybe this is a future question that someone else is going to ask in chat, probably right after this, of, well, why are you not playing Hushbringer instead of Tocatli Honor Guard? It's a 1/3, so most relevant matchups are going to be creature matchups like humans and goblins. And if you play this, your goblin's opponent can't Tarfire Tocatli Honor Guard.
Mm-hmm.
It used to also be the case that you would play this against Dredge, because it would stop some of their Dredge things from coming back. And then you could also just Stonewall Bloodghast. That's not as much the case now because they have the Ghoul over Bloodghast a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And then there's also like, I consider bringing in some number of this card against things like Amulet. If you can stop that Titan trigger and then Path Titan, then you've just cleanly answered their entire game plan. So the way you get around the non-bow is the same way you get around it with Arbiter, and the answer is sequencing. So you just have to sequence properly. There are points in the game where, yes, you will play a 3-mana Flicker Wisp that's just a 3/1 flyer, but the case is that if you're playing against humans, that card is, as just a 3/1 flyer, is better than almost everything they can do, with the sole exception of Mantis Rider, because their whole deck is turned off. So it's a matter of leveraging over your opponent. I'll even bring this in the mirror because I have control over when I play this card.
Right. It's such a non-bow sometimes. It's good in the mirror.
I mean,
yeah. It sounds so funny.
Yeah.
Destroy. I'm going to play Death and Taxes and destroy the other Death and Taxes deck with this thing.
I mean, I've had it happen before where I had an opponent who was playing, I don't think they were on my same list, but like a similarly like low on ETB kind of list, and we both had Tocatli Honor Guards in play, and I'm like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. Just staring at each other. Okay, so this is a great question. Thoughts on Eldrazi Displacer and the Containment Priest combo in well, I don't know about Eldrazi and Taxes, but just talking just normal, that combo, I just had a league where I went 4-1, and the only deck I lost to was this, what I thought was just this, oh yeah, I guess it is Eldrazi and Taxes because it played with Displacer, but I just thought it was like this ridiculous combo at first. Why are you viling in your Containment Priest? It looks like it doesn't have synergy, but in actuality, they're trying to get rid of my creatures. Then I killed the Containment Priest. Now they're just blinking their creatures.
Yeah. This question makes me sad. Like this hurts. And the reason is that I have wanted Containment Priest in Modern for so long, and I just can't. It's just not good. It just doesn't do anything in Modern. The biggest thing that this would do, that I wish it did, that it should do, is stop Uro, and it doesn't stop Uro.
Well, you Flicker Wisp it when it enters the battlefield. That's because that's what they did to me. They was like, this Containment Priest does nothing. Oh, Flicker Wisp, target your creature. Oh, crap. Now what's happening?
Your opponent then just plays a 3-mana Uro, and they just have a 3-mana 6/6 with attack triggers. So I mean, like I guess that would be Takali Honor Guard. I'm sorry, that's
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah,
Wrong.
yeah. That's different card.
Yeah, wrong idea. But the reason that it just doesn't do enough in the meta with the hate by itself. So the only version of taxes that I would like this in is Thalia Stompy, because you don't have Aether Vial. So there's no Nonbo there, and you do just get to exile your opponent's creatures with Displacer. But sadly, I'm not even playing it there, just because, like I said, the effect is not relevant outside of exactly that interaction. And it just needs to do more against the meta, right? Like, would we play Leonin Arbiter for the combo with Path and Ghost Quarter if there were no fetches in the format? Probably not, right?
Thoughts on Blade Splicer?
So this is Death and Catmix. This is also a Death and Taxes master, and I think he's just trying to get my goat here. I don't like it.
Oh yeah, it is. I didn't even notice. Welcome, Death and Catmix, another content creator. Or he's content creator? I know he's a player. No, yeah, you're a content creator. You have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, for
Check
sure.
out Death and Catmix for your Death and Taxes stuff.
So I would like Catmix. I think he and I even actually talked about this. You play this if there's a lot of Jund, and that's it. Just hard stop, Jund only. Moving on.
A 2-in-1.
Yeah.
By itself.
Yeah.
What are the best resources for a budding Death and Taxes modern player? My buddy just picked up the deck as his first modern deck. So where do you go?
There's actually a lot. There are a number of Discords. I know that there's one on Facebook. There is the Discord that I actively am in was the one that came from MTG Salvation. I also stream. Death and Catmix will occasionally stream. There's a couple of up and coming Death and Catmix. I'm saying Death and Catmix now.
Yeah.
Death
Fantastic name.
There's actually quite a bit out there. I would encourage your buddy to just try starting with my last mono white deck that we did the deck tech with here. And even if I'm not playing Death and Taxes on, the day your friend tunes in, I'm very likely to play it at some point. I highly encourage you to check out my Twitch if you're trying to figure out how to play Taxes.
Mm-hmm. Where am I here? Okay, so if anyone has a Death and Taxes build that they would like to get reviewed, go !deck review, and then put the URL, and then put any comments that you'd like us to know. Like, is it on a budget? What format is it? Well, preferably modern. And any like some weaknesses that you want to be fixed, and hopefully we can get the master to review it. So while if anyone has any decks to be reviewed, we can still answer some questions in the meantime.
Sure.
This is a very difficult thing, but many people like to say that Death and Taxes is not a good deck, even though it consistently gets 5-0s. What needs to change for Death and Taxes to get more respect as a meta deck?
This is another Death and Taxes content creator.
Oh yeah.
Hey, Offbeat. So, frankly, I think this is the kind of archetype that people just will not respect. It was the case in Legacy for a long, long time, where people saw that deck and they're like, "Oh, this must be terrible." I think
Mother of Runes in this format. What are you doing?
Right? It's a Thalia in this economy. Yeah. But I think we get a lot of 5-0s. People don't put that much stock in 5-0s. I think you just have to start winning more big events.
Mm-hmm.
Play those challenges, play those Mox events, play what you can play, tune your deck for that meta, take it down, and then maybe your opponents are going to start putting Torpor Orbs in their sideboard, and they're going to start playing like Azet Staticasters and Plague Engineers, and then you're going to be sad you did well.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, let's see. I have no idea if anyone submitted anything. Let's see if there's any decks to review today. No deck list review. Okay, that's okay. We can finish off with the Q&A. There's still quite a few questions. I guess no one's brewing, with Death and Taxes lately. They just like to copy the 5-0 lists.
They've maybe already gotten my my feedback in our Discord.
Yeah, exactly. Is SpiderSpace a content creator? I just see his 5-0s pop up now and then. Yes, he's now into Twitch. We'll have all the information will be in the description below, where you can contact SpiderSpace.
Yeah,
That's
so
100%. So I usually ask this at the very end, but that's all. It's all good right now. If people want to learn more about Death and Taxes, especially through you, where can they find you?
So I am SpiderSpace MTG on Twitch, and I am just SpiderSpace SpiderSpace MTG on Twitter, SpiderSpace on Twitch. I'm trying to maybe eventually get up a YouTube page going. I will say that, like you mentioned, you had a hard time finding me. I didn't have a Twitter before. I was still streaming, and it's unfortunately been kind of inconsistent due to life outside of Magic. But I'm trying to buckle down and actually get a real streaming schedule up, so it's not just a 5-0 UC, but that Twitch channel as well.
Exactly. Would it ever be worth to hybrid with mono white tokens to get some more aggro starts?
Well, so that's a interesting question. I don't think that any of the tokens cards are the direction you want to be going, because you're playing Thalia, so like paying 3 mana to get 2 1/1s is not that great. I realize Lingering Souls is a card, but it doesn't even really see play itself now. The one card I would say from tokens that you could try, and I have tried in Taxes, is actually the White Force, so Force of Virtue. And I think that card could see play in like a Squadron Hawk style grind build. So you play Squadron Hawk, you get the other Hawks, you then exile a Hawk to the Force, so you're not really down on cards. Maybe even.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
So that would be the closest thing to a hybrid, but you're not really playing tokens. It's just the Force.
Force of Virtue. Maybe some hidden value there in Modern. Already seeing play in the mono white tokens deck. Hold on, what got you into Taxes?
I think I mentioned this a little bit at the start. I was just trying to get into Modern and had like a very casual play group here at the university I was attending at the time. And, we just played casually, and a guy brought his Legacy Death and Taxes deck, and I just thought it was so cool. It's like, frankly, I got Rishadan ported, and I was like, I want to do that to people.
Let's see. Okay, here, maybe we can have a little bit of a discussion here. Lots of people ask for a GT unban. Why are they wrong?
I actually don't think they are wrong.
I'm pro GT unban, because this. Would you even play it? Like, probably you would, but like, I don't know if it would take over the format.
No. So the thing about GT, I actually just did a series on this with MTG Tavern about what it would look like if we had a JIT unban. And the thing is, I don't think it takes over the format. I think it's actually probably bad for creature decks like ours, more so than it's good for us, even though I think probably Death and Taxes is the deck most equipped to use it and use it regularly because of Stoneforge. But it's not, like you hit with it. If you're playing against a creature deck, it can snowball, but it's no worse than your opponent just like turn 2 Renin 6, right? Because I
personally don't really feel it's that much worse than sort of Fire and Ice at this point.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it would be fine. I think it could cause some like unfun play patterns in those, specifically those creature-based matchups. But I don't think it's like beyond the power level. It might homogenize decks a little bit. Like if you're going to play a creature deck, you probably have some number of Jittes in there. And if you're playing Jittes, maybe you should be playing Stoneforge. But I think it would be fine.
Oh man, you're probably going to have a list here. What legacy cards do you want to see in Modern?
So the number one that we should not see, that I would enjoy playing but we shouldn't have, is Wasteland. It shouldn't be in Modern, but I would have a ball. The card that probably is a reasonable replacement, I actually would enjoy playing Dust Bowl. I actually don't even think it would see that much play, but I think it
Probably
would do
not.
similar, because just it's a little bit expensive
Yeah.
to do it. But I would really enjoy having Dust Bowl. And then the one that I actually think is reasonable is Rishadan Port. I think there are not that many decks that are equipped to abuse it. And those that are could use the power boost. People just wouldn't like playing against it. That's the biggest reason it wouldn't see play. Note that all the cards I just mentioned are lands. I think those are the biggest upgrades Modern Death and Taxes could use. I wouldn't mind Recruiter of the Guard or things like that, but I think lands are the biggest thing we need.
This might be harder to answer, but what cards? Because I've talked about this in some past shows. What cards are available in Legacy that don't see play in Legacy that you would like to see in Death and Taxes and Modern?
Oh, that is
like there's some of these cards that they're part of the personality of Legacy, so it might prevent Wizards from putting them into Modern. But there are some dead cards in Legacy that don't see play. Maybe those can be converted to Modern.
Armageddon.
Ooh.
Just easy Armageddon.
You really are old school.
I mean, I can't tell you the amount of matchups where I wish I could just do this. Like playing against Eldrazi Tron, I'm ahead, just boom, Armageddon, game over. You're playing against Control, they're going to get their Uro out soon, but you're a little bit ahead and you just want to end the game on the spot, boom, Armageddon. It would be the sideboard card that we never knew we needed. Cataclysm would also be fine as a replacement, or obviously Ravages of War is the same thing. I think it's just Ravages, no R.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Ravages of War. More Armageddon effects.
All of them.
Interesting. All right, sweet. Well, I certainly would like to see Wizards to explore moving some cards from Legacy that don't see play in Legacy to Modern. I'm still waiting for Counterspell. I might have to wait a very long time, but I'm still waiting on it.
Do you want it in the blue soup that is Modern now?
See, that's the problem for a Merfolk player. There's so many cards that I want that their Wizards doesn't want to give because it will just get utilized by the other blue decks, and they always have to think about that. Like, I'm never going to get back. I want back to basics. I'm never going to get back to basics because like a blue-white control deck will just use it. They'll just play with basics and back to basics everyone else. Yeah, it's hard as a Merfolk player to get good stuff that people are complaining about Force of Negation, for crying out loud.
Right. I mean, at least you're in a color that's gonna get things, right?
Yeah. I guess there's some truth to that. What do you think about playing Stoneforge Mystic and Displacer and Thought-Knot Seer in the same white build? You lose flex spots like Selfless Spirit and Luris, but gain raw power.
Yeah, I've played around with this kind of shell before, of like a mono white Eldrazi and Taxes Blade, however you want to say that kind of list. It's fine. It grinds pretty well. You do have some of that hand disruption that TKS offers. Displacer is a very powerful Magic card. I'm not going to tell you it's wrong. I don't think it is, but I'm just shying a little bit away from Eldrazi because of the presence of Blood Moon in Modern right now. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not as good as it once was against the red decks because of Soulscar Mage. So I'm personally shying away from Eldrazi, but I think you could certainly find some success with this kind of build. From the perspective of someone playing Death and Taxes, how powerful would a 1-mana Icy Manipulator? So trying to find a way around the Rishiden port, huh?
Yeah, yeah, basically.
I don't know if we would play it if it was an artifact. I think we would absolutely play it if it was a creature. So
okay.
There's kind of some give and take there. Yeah, I think a 1-mana artifact one, I'm not even sure it would see any play in Modern. But we would certainly, I would try it as an artifact, but I think it would actually find a home as a creature.
And then maybe well, this sort of has been alluded to, but what's stopping taxes from being tier 1?
Every time I seem to do well with taxes, I'll tune it towards the meta. I'll really have like let's say I really have prowess and Mystic Sanctuary, like Uropile decks number, right? And I'll be tuned towards those. I'm beating those, and then all of a sudden I play against Eldrazi, Tron, and Jund back to back to back to back.
You're explaining my life right now.
And the thing is, like, the truth is that I can tune towards those decks, and I probably can beat them if I tune enough. But the moment I do that, I'm going to play against prowess and the Uropiles, and I'm going to get dumpstered by them because I don't have enough tools to beat all of those things at once, since there's no like free win with taxes. It's often a joke I've had with my friends when I go to a GP with taxes where I had it tuned for the top decks, and it was like, if I can win, then I am more likely to keep winning because I want to be at those top tables against those decks. But the moment I lose, I'm going to play against the stuff that I don't want to play against. So it's like
some random stuff.
Right, exactly.
That you aren't tuned for. Okay. Well, I think that's going to be it for today. So thanks to everybody who submitted questions, who is here to become part, got this masterclass from the Death and Taxes master, SpiderSpace, who's been in the space of Death and Taxes for a very long time, always putting up consistent results. So and I think it was some very, very insightful knowledge and information. If you think you can take, remove Leon Arbiter out of the deck or take Stoneforge Mystic out of the deck, don't do it. That's, if there's one thing we should all take away from today, don't do it. So, and you stream on Twitch right now, so if anyone wants to, make sure you follow SpiderSpace on Twitch and Twitter. We'll have all that information in the description below. And so just once more, thank you very much, SpiderSpace, for coming out here and helping us all out, learn a little bit more about Death and Taxes in today's modern metagame.
Thanks for having me.
So this is going to be it for Coffee and MTG. Thanks, everyone, for showing up and your questions, and I will see you at the next cup. Take care. See you next time.